Okay, good morning, everybody. We're live in Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. Friday, February 16th. The goal today is to vote our housing bill out, the Bringing Everyone Home Bill, S311, by 11 a.m. so that we can participate in the Vermont Outdoor Recreation press conference at 11. And obviously we'll delay that if something arises with the housing bill. But in the meantime, before we just run through the bill and our witness list, I know that it's really important to people around the table that we continue our work on the housing survey, that we know from the Home Act and from our proposals in this bill, roughly how much housing we're creating through our funding mechanisms. And at some point, it would be nice, I am adding language that people will see in S311 to at least reference our healthy vacancy rates. I don't think we've talked enough about making sure that units of housing we think we're creating in these small but important development areas actually create a healthy rental and homeownership vacancy rate, which, as I understand it, is about 5% for rental vacancy and 2% for homeownership vacancy. That's coming from me, so I haven't looked at the science lately, but I want us to be able to understand our housing needs and our housing creation in reference to healthy vacancy and how much each program we're funding buys us in terms of units. Pat is working on that still. It's a difficult process and he's getting all the agencies to participate. Is there anything, Pat, you wanted to add or any questions people have?
Pat Chittich in Joint Fiscal Office. I'll just add that I've heard back from all of the relevant agencies on this. They are working on this one, so we should have some information soon.
Yeah, and I think knowing how much work it is, the goal, the aspirational goal would be around when this hits the floor, which will probably be the last week of crossover after it goes through the money committee. So that gives us, I think, around another month. So thank you.
I think we're surely on track for that.
Great. I'm just saying it for the rest of everyone listening. We have a month and we'd love to be looking at something by then. Senator Harris.
Just a really quick comment. There was a real amazing spreadsheet done last year at
That's
the
what
end
we're
of
up to.
session. Okay, perfect.
That's
Thank
what
you.
we're up to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
We only got one huge, amazing spreadsheet from what I recall. So I think we're all on the same page.
Right.
Yeah.
And
And that's it.
Scott Moore. Which one it is? I've been.
Well, I
Or
have
you
easy,
probably
I
do
have
too.
easy lines with that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
I think Pat knows which
You
one.
put that stuff.
Right, right.
Well, thank you, Pat. Yeah. Okay. So we can let you go unless you want to be here for that. Oh, yay. Okay. A lot of people hanging out today. So the first sections we want to walk through are the tax and revenue sections. Oh, there's Kirby. So I don't know, Kirby and Ted, if you both want to be up front or one before the other.
I don't, we have a preference. Would you like to hear the fiscal background before the language or vice versa?
Does anyone have a preference? Ted, you're closer to the witness chair. That's how I'm gonna make this decision. So, hi. We're bringing you chairs. Thank you so much.
So we also need the return in Senate Gov Ops.
Okay. After
Cabinets.
the next.
Yeah.
Next
committee.
Here, we can,
Yeah,
we can hold these over here.
They do the return, I mean,
Thank you so much.
Thanks for
Well,
bringing
someone
us.
have to direct the you know, yeah, they have.
we are.
That's a good.
132.
Okay, are we, so let's pause for a moment. Are we now looking at a new draft?
Not,
Not yet. Do we have a new draft of the bill yet?
no.
John Gray is working hard.
Yes.
To strike all together
Okay.
as we speak.
Yes, but at the moment,
It could arrive at any moment. If we don't get the strike all before I get up there, I do have the language I can just pull up for you.
And you can pull it up, so.
which is different from our
Yeah.
as-built district.
Yes.
There's relatively similar language, but there are new sections that we've added.
Right, so if we want to tag along on paper at the moment, it may be different, but it's on page 32, section 27.
It really depends on what Ted is gonna pull up for us,
Yeah.
but yeah.
So
For the record, Ted Burnett, Joint Fiscal Office, I was planning on doing property transfer tax at kind of a 50,000 foot overview.
Right,
And then before diving into the specific
Perfect.
language,
Do you have a visual?
I do, golly, I tried to get into the Zoom link and it
Oh, no.
hung out.
I don't see you right now.
Okay, I'm gonna try again. And then, yeah, start from the 50,000 foot overview and then kind of narrow into the changes that are proposed.
And while we're working on that, I'll just say, we did hear back from the administration, Senator Brock, specifically uplifted this request, and I've at least had a chance, he and I have had a chance to talk to Senator Cummings. It's, in my mind, it's ultimately Senator Cummings' call in finance, but the two provisions on the property transfer tax exemption and the property tax exemption put forward by the administration are back in the proposal so that they can work with us to find a path forward, to find revenue, whatever the case may be, by the time we discuss it in finance. So if we think it's relatively sound economic policy, we will talk about the financial policy in finance.
So we won't talk about it here.
Well, we have to pass it.
We have 20 minutes to talk about it. And you can ask questions about the economics of it. And we have people prepared to speak to that.
Okay.
But I wanted, I didn't want you to think it's just a 24-hour conversation. And it's keep gesturing to Senator Cummings because ultimately she's okay with discussing it in finance. That's where the merits of the money spent on an exemption. Okay. So Ted, back to you.
Just need to remind.
Yes, he's.
There we are. Okay. So, understanding, wanted to run through kind of how the property transfer tax works currently, how it's outlined in statute. And really what's most helpful for me to see this laid out is the Department of Taxes put together this kind of chart that gives different check marks based on the type of residence, the marginal or the value of the transfer, and how these
It's a
different
tiny
tax.
bit bigger.
Let's see if I can do
Just-
that.
If we don't have
I'm
the,
in that camp now, so.
Yeah, let's.
Bottom right, yeah.
Bottom right. Oh, I always forget about the slider. Thank you. Thanks, Gene Silence. I appreciate it. So, is that better?
Nice,
Yes.
yeah.
Great.
much better.
Fantastic. And so there are kind of three different pieces with the property transfer tax for non-principal residences. All of the value that is transferred is subject to the 1.25% property transfer tax and the 0.2% clean water surcharge. For principal residences, the first $100,000 of value is subject to 0.5% of property transfer tax. And then the marginal value, so if it was a $200,000 house, the extra 100,000 would be subject to the property transfer tax 1.25% and the clean water surcharge. And then finally, if for transfers that kind of happen with EHFA, USDA, or VCTF assistance, the first $110,000 of value is completely exempted from the property transfer tax. And then for the kind of marginal value between 110 and 200,000, there's a 1.25% property transfer tax rate. And then for the marginal value above 200,000, the clean water surcharge gets added. So there's a lot of moving pieces with this one. And so that's on the revenue side. Once it comes in, statute lays out a whole set of allocations and distributions. And it's kind of spread across a bunch of different chapters. So prior to any distributions, the first 2.5 million pays for housing bonds at EHFA. Then prior to distributions, 2.2% is supposed to be deposited in a special fund for PDR administration costs. And then you have the allocations that we've talked quite a bit about. 50% of the remaining revenues goes to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Trust Fund, 17% to the Municipal and Regional Planning Fund. That has its own statutory set of allocations for that piece. 10% to Vermont Center of Geographic Information, 70% for regional planning commissions, and 20% for municipalities. And then finally, 33% to the general fund. And in addition, from the clean water surcharge, there's $1 million that the first $1 million goes to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Trust Fund. So that's the structure laid out in the statute. Moving to the budget piece and how this has actually been not withstood since fiscal year 2020, showing kind of the different pieces at the bottom, and each different color is a new fiscal year. So the lightest color is in fiscal year 2020, and then the darkest color is how it's laid out in the 2025 government budget. And so the general trend you get to see kind of all the way at the right, the huge spike as a result of house sales during COVID. And so in fiscal year 2020, the revenue for the property transfer tax and clean water surcharge was just north of 40 million.
What I don't see there, that I could be misreading this.
Yeah.
What it's supposed to be each year.
So I didn't put that in the
Okay,
chart.
that's
This is just actual how it's put
Yeah,
out in
yeah.
the budget
Right.
process.
Could you like wave the arrow over where it should be, do you think, or is that too subjective?
That would be a little tricky.
Okay.
In this contract, I could definitely kind of run the numbers on those pieces.
Doesn't have to be for the purposes of today.
Yeah,
I think that's always the issue is we know we're not living up to our promises. I don't think we know each year by how much. So
Yeah.
look at that.
So to go to our chair's point, it's great to see what's proposed, but I'd like to also have an overlay of what is supposed to be, what's supposed to be.
sure.
I agree.
And
Yeah.
the promises we're not meeting.
Well, I could definitely add those to a chart and supply it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's-
Okay.
certainly. And so, yes, talking about the general trends, huge spike, in fiscal year 22, the revenue increased almost to 77 million. And then in fiscal year 25, you get this kind of cooling trend, down to 58.1
Right.
million.
And the other politics of this are that for the past couple years at least, we put one-time money toward DHCD. A lot of it has been specified for housing, I understand. So, we like to try and honor both and do the right, give them the amount that they were actually supposed to be allocated for both in every year. But we have done one-time housing.
So, but for us to interpret the actual 58 million is what's predicted, that the total property transfer tax as currently constructed in statute will bring in.
That is correct.
That is not subject for that's just that is the prediction.
Yes, exactly. That is in the revenue forecast under current law on the amount that will come in for
For
both the
FY 25.
property transfer tax and the clean water surcharge.
Right.
And it's spiked in 2022 with how many properties transferred hands?
You're talking about the increase in revenue?
Yeah,
Yes.
Went up to 77.
yeah, is that right? That was
Yes,
a big year for home sales,
yes, it was
and
huge.
they've plateaued much lower now.
Yes, and I'd have to dig in a little more to
Yeah.
understand if it was driven more by the value of properties transferred
Right.
versus the number.
That makes
And
sense,
tease out
yeah.
those two pieces, but yes, between those two things.
That might have been like the high water mark for the prices of.
That's
Housing.
COVID and climate refugees.
Sure, yeah, there was a
Climate
huge influx
immigrants, like,
of,
to
yes,
places.
of folks moving to the state and that drove
The
property
wealth
transfer
to
tax
move.
revenue. Yes. And so, yes, this also shows the different, you can see kind of as revenues have increased in the property transfer tax, the VHC, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Trust Fund received a bump in fiscal year 23, from a little bit north of 10 million to a little bit more than 20 million. And so moving from the budgetary picture, this is kind of a forecast of all of the PTT changes in S311. As I understand, two pieces that are new is increasing the exemption for EHFA, USDA supported transactions to $150,000. We looked at the number and that is kind of expected to cost $110,000 per year in property transfer tax revenue. It's just because the number of transactions on the base of 58.1 million, where we estimate that $500,000 worth of transactions have received that existence. So it's a relatively small piece of the pie, so the revenue loss from that piece is low.
So Sorry, that's not actually said on that, I don't see anywhere, right,
No, this is kind of putting it all together.
Yeah.
Yes, this is pulling all the changes together. That's
so this
including.
is the, 150
Mhm.
and the 220, did we have 220 somewhere? No, okay, this is what we would lose, okay, great. And are those numbers still accurate, Ted, that we would lose? That we would forego revenue of 220? That, what else?
220 might have been Moore's estimate of how many there are, and they're not all changing hands.
No, 220,000 I have. That we would, or the,
That amount could be if the exemption was raised to 200,000. I know,
Okay.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
Not entirely sure. I do know that, yes, that's based on the $150,000 exemption, the revenue loss would be 110,000. This is also factoring in, the administration's estimate, which we're in agreement of 400,000 for blighted property transfers. Being exempted from the property transfer tax. So,
right, that's the governor's proposal.
And
exactly.
That we,
You'll see
Yes.
that language back in what Kirby presents, so that you can see what it said.
So blighted properties to be exempt from
That-
the addition.
So that would be if you're purchasing, you know, from the property transfer tax, so the purchase of a blighted
That
property,
makes sense.
fairly low value, fairly low.
Why does it blighted property?
yes, that's,
Well, there are
Folio is
definitions.
on Zoom. Or Kirby might have it, I don't know if jail, if Ledge Council or the commissioner finds it.
Well, there's a definition of blighted property. Do you want to know that now or wait? till
No,
we
it's
get
like,
to it?
there's a definition, okay.
so, given that they had asked for an increase in VHIP to $70,000, this is an additional gift to people who are investing in blighted properties. So if you look at it as an
Oh, I see.
investment in a blighted property,
Right.
the governor is proposing, and Alice are proposing that we not only exempt them from the property transfer tax, but we're also giving them more money.
I do wanna say, they might not all be the same, right? VHIP means you're fixing up a unit for a specific purpose,
Yeah,
for a specific population of people.
it's a different,
This is like, maybe you're fixing up this
For commercial,
eyesore somewhere, and you're not getting any other money, you're just taking something that's a drain.
fair,
Yeah,
fair, but for those that
Yeah.
are gonna be rental, this could be,
Sure.
this is just an additional. It is an additional benefit, which will cost us money also.
yeah,
$400,000.
right.
If it's 200,
So the question is, it's, you know, especially for those people who get a second bite of the apple to talk about this. Can you live with this proposal being discussed more in Senate Finance? And do you see the sort of economic merit of this proposal? And do you have any more questions?
yeah, I'd like to know what, sorry, now that I've got my head around this, what is the blighted property at X amount is how much?
So
As
that
lost
is,
revenue of tax expenditure.
sure, so that is $400,000, that piece by itself. Yeah, so that's looking at a blighted property gets exempted from the property.
That's just
tax.
any blighted property. That's what we're guessing at the moment.
Correct, that is our estimate, yes, and the administration's estimate, we kind of both went at it from slightly different angles and came to roughly the same number, so we're in
Right,
consensus.
Senator.
Yes,
Yeah.
My former realtor hat. When I get to closing, who determines, I'm sitting there with a lawyer in the bank, who determines that property, where is that designation made before I get to closing?
And is it made currently?
I don't understand that it's unrestricted, I know that Commissioner Bolio is here on Zoom, he might be a great person for that question, it's a bit outside my
I thought I saw the
Jurisdiction.
realtors in the hall.
Why don't we
Yes.
get through
Yeah.
Ted and Kirby and then ask Commissioner Bolio any of our questions, how it's not all the proposals?
So just so I understand,
Mhm.
so the net difference in this is 27 million, is that what you're saying?
So the 27 million piece
Does that
is
include?
for second residences.
That's
Yeah,
our
so
proposal.
yes, your proposal to increase the rate on second residences from 1.25 to 2.5.
But, so just to be clear, our proposal is half of that, because Ted is taking into account the existing 1.25% that everyone
Yes.
pays, but adding our additional one.
Okay,
And
so
I-
half of that.
Half of
Okay,
that
yeah,
is
'cause
what
we were
was
at
new.
14 million before.
Right.
Yes, sorry, and
Okay.
I carved this out because the allocations rely on that
Mm.
whole
I understand,
Chunk,
but I just
yeah.
wanna be clear.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's half of the 27 million.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. And so this table shows, the allocations in S 311. So for the second residence, 2.5%, that's 9602A4. You have the 60% that goes to VHCB, which of that 27 million, the entire pie, not the additional part, that's 16.2 million. For the municipal and regional planning funds, that's 6.3 million, and the general fund would receive 4.4 million, and that's 16.5% of that 27 million. The balance would be,
Senator Harrison. do you-
And the clean water surcharge would not change because that's off the top.
that would not change because that rate hasn't been changed. It's just 2.2% off the marginal value.
Okay, and
Yeah.
just to be clear, that's how it would be appropriated if we appropriated according to the, according to the statute, which we haven't done. So I just wanna,
Right, and there's
Yes.
not much more language we could put in to make our intent more known, you know, but that'll be a conversation that we have, is not to take this away from needed areas if we're gonna pack the rest of this.
right, especially the municipalities and the
Yes.
regional commissions, and is just one other question,
Yeah.
the clean water surcharge? Does that get allocated as scheduled?
Aside from the first million off the top, which goes to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Trust Fund, the balance does go to the Clean Water Fund. Yes,
So I wonder, wanna use that mechanism?
It's
But that's
the same
probably
mechanism,
too late
just no one
to find out.
steals it, I guess, like, I don't know.
People are
It's just another
they don't
fund,
bring that.
right?
We just haven't,
Maybe kind of because they remember when we created it, and it was a lot of
which was
heartache.
relatively recent.
I don't wanna speak for my colleagues, but
Yeah,
it hasn't
interesting.
touched the
Okay.
Senator Clarkson.
So if, Ted, if you go back
Yes.
up to the seasonal resident surcharge. Right. Okay,
Yep.
so that is the total that is raised. It's not the and if it's really more like 14 million additional dollars is what we're talking about.
yes,
So of the 14 additional million dollars, we had talked about 70% going to VHCB and 30% going to our RPCs. So here you're looking at it as a whole. So the 16 million represents 70% of the total.
60%. And I
As
think
opposed
that,
for
to
GRE.
70. What happened to our
Kirby
70%?
can
What
show you the language, because they merged the proportions so that we're not adding a whole new chunk of statute that says, but of this new increment, this is the percentage. They've just taken our intent and merged it into the existing allocations.
Okay, so this is what's confusing me. So it was
Yeah.
supposed to be 70% of the 14 million.
Mm-hmm.
We're adding that 16 reflects what? Because that's obviously above this 14
It
million.
might be easier to look again at the statutory language when we get to it,
Yep.
but that number is reflecting the statutory language that merges our proposal on the 1.25% with the existing allocation on the first 1.25%. I wish I.
Exactly.
Okay, more
Yeah,
clearly.
no,
So
Yeah.
the allocation is consistent with our intent.
Yes,
The last time we talked about this.
yes,
and Kirby will show us that language again. But trust us, because it, you know, when it gets to finance and appropriations and the world, they can't sort of see, by the way, also on this new percent, it's this much, it's much cleaner if we're just clear about our new intent in one section.
yes. And that's, I presented in the table to exactly reflect the statutory language as opposed to the additional kind of surcharge.
House,
That's the
house
house.
is on it, I think.
That you said, I'm being at 3.
We're on that, what time is it? We're on 11:30.
Yes.
Yes.
Speaking of which, Kirby would have 15 minutes if we start with him now, so how are you doing on?
That's fine. I could run through all of these. Also, my computer just flashed a little battery warning. So
Okay,
maybe it's just,
okay.
quite honestly, it must be
Like
cold or something. I don't know. It really just lost all its juice. So, If you wanted me to run through the right totals super quickly before that happened, or we could just.
That,
Okay.
Sorry,
What else do you
Yes.
have?
So this is showing, in addition, the piece that allocates 2 million off the top, before any revenues are allocated to, the NRB. So you have your total property transfer tax revenue, the housing bond receives first 2.5 million. NRB will receive 2 million. The Department of Tax Administration will receive their 2%. This is all under current statute. And then you have the combined allocations for VHCB, the Municipal and Regional Planning Fund, the general fund, kind of adding both the second residence 2.5% and the balance of property transfer tax revenues. So that would be 31.5 million for Vermont Housing and Conservation, 11.5 million for municipal and regional planning, and 14.6% for the general fund. So that's how it all breaks out. And I will stop my share right here, just in case.
Right.
It's good.
we have, okay, now, we're adding
Let's stick
things
to
in.
sort of, yeah, like, well, the only other thing we added was the NRB 2 million.
Yeah, that was an addition.
Yeah.
When did that happen?
We asked Sabina the other day, oh, there's Sabina. We asked Sabina, how much do you need, for what you're losing, the additional burdens
Right,
or
okay, that's the
the
fee loss.
responsibilities.
That's the field.
It's the
We
fee
lost
loss
in the
plus,
professional board,
yes,
increased costs.
okay,
And then just one comment, I prefer that the tax department amount be an amount rather than a percentage, because I don't think their costs go up with the percentage of.
that would be a big change that you could recommend to finance, but that's already in
Yeah.
statute, so I don't wanna sort of
Yeah,
try to have that conversation.
Noting it.
Yeah,
like the NRB.
right. And we have the commissioner, but we'll wait until we hear from Kirby to ask any final questions. There is the other property tax proposal that we're putting back in. Are you comfortable with Kirby being the chair for that? We can ask you questions if we have.
In addition to the exemption of the PTT.
There were two proposals that,
Right,
Oh,
yes.
the ones we took out, we're putting back in.
That's the,
Well,
that seems to be the bargain.
but I wanna, we did Senator Cummings talk about that.
Yes, no,
Okay.
that's
I
fine.
just wanna make sure people don't think I'm lying. So we'll get Kirby in the witness chair and we've given John another until 9:45 to try to pull the
Thank you,
pieces
Ted.
together.
Have you sent that to us?
That I can send that,
I think
Yeah,
that
it should
would
be on the-
and add it to the committee page. Yes, I
Yeah.
didn't get a chance to send it
Before
before I
your
hopped in.
computer dies.
Yes,
please.
I will do my best.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kirby,
Do you need it?
Okay.
No, it's a.
so we have a little over 10 minutes, folks, with Kirby, and that's if we have no questions for Commissioner Bolio. We have to get the rest of the bill, so kind of speed through a little bit.
If we can.
Magali.
It looks like, yeah, we don't have the doc posted yet, but I will pull up a doc for us to look at.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Could you just remind me what the second governor's proposal was, because it had taken it, I hadn't focused on it. Remind me what the second one is. Okay, so
Let's,
now.
yeah, well, let's,
Yeah, we can go quickly here, because we're short on time. So, Kirby Keaton Legislative Council, what I have is just a document of just the tax sections that was used for the strike all. You'll be seeing a full strike all later, that's in the works. It's going to have all of what I'm about to show you in there with the effective date, it's all set. But, the document I'm sharing is was the kind of work in progress before that. First part of our language is the second home rate and allocation that we had discussed before, right? And also in that section is an increase in the top amount that's excluded for the VHFA, et cetera, mortgages. That's all we
Mhm.
about.
so that's that $110,000
So the part,
deduction for, yeah.
except that no tax shall be imposed on the first 110,000 as current law, this would change that to 150,000. In value of the property transferred if the purchaser obtains a purchase money mortgage funded in part with a homeland grant through the Vermont Housing Conservation Trust Fund, or that the Vermont Housing and Finance Agency or U.S. Department of Agriculture and Rural Development has committed to make or purchase. And the tax at the rate of 1.25% shall be imposed on the value of that property in excess of the 50,000. And we also heard from Pat that, from Ted rather, that the clean water surcharge would kick in at 200,000, which is, that's not here, but that's a factor there.
Been a long week. I forgive you.
I don't know if I'll ever stop mixing them up. We'll find out. So the language on sub 4 here is what I mentioned before, is the second home rate, as it's been called here. Nothing's changed.
Well, I was told, excuse me, last night at the property tax kind of group that's talking about what we can do.
Okay.
Second home tax came up, and we were told we can't really identify second homes.
We have Commissioner Bolio here.
So
I
I can't identify them.
I think we're asking him to
That's good.
speed up the process, and I think it's a way to get property owners to proactively be telling us what category they fall in.
They have to do that currently by
Yeah. But
declaring.
let's save that
Okay,
all for
but if
Commissioner
you're
Bolio.
moving
Mhm.
here, you might be buying a house that you intend to use as your permanent residence,
Mhm.
but you can't move for 6 months or a year because you've not at retirement age
Mhm.
or, I could own that house for a while.
So I'll just
Before I
say,
might
we will
move in.
continue that conversation in finance. I think, you know, the mechanics of it, we can continue that.
And also, I
That
don't think
conversation.
we
We don't have enough to do in
The-
finance.
I would
I don't think we can tax people on further future intent.
I
I
would
think you have to tax them for what its current purpose is and not future intent.
Then you were going to be taxing,
I'm sorry, I represent so many people who say, oh, but we're gonna move, we're gonna be here full time in 10 years. It's like, okay, but right now it's a seasonal
But-
residence.
if you're buying it from out of, there's a time between when you buy a house and when you move into it.
Sure.
You may have your permanent residence in New York, but.
I think, you know, this
So-
sounds like a classic finance
Yeah,
conversation
it
of,
It's,
You know-
it's a mechanical solution.
exactly.
And again, you have to work through the intricacies of
Right.
what that solution is and how it works, when it kicks in, how the tax department gets notified. And again, I leave that to Commissioner Bolio,
Right.
perhaps give us some input on it, but.
Yeah, let's at least get
solid.
rolling. Yeah, yeah.
One thing I would note was when you're talking about second homes and taxation, there could be a property tax context, and there could be the property transfer tax
Right.
context, and they actually have different wrinkles to them.
Mhm.
And this is property transfer tax where the purchaser is declaring how they will use the property.
Mhm.
That's I mean, Commissioner Wilder should probably speak to compliance around that, but
Right.
that's a little easier to manage for the state compared with if property taxes were to be imposed, which is, has more obstacles.
Yes.
So, the next few sections are the allocations that we've discussed. The numbers aren't quite obvious of the 70-30 split for the new revenue, but the math's been done. It operates as the committee has intended.
Good,
Uh,
that's always good.
There's a few different funds involved, so we're going through those. As laid out before.
I'm looking at section 30 and there's several repeals. Alcohol beverage tax, I assume that's been repealed somewhere else by somebody else, because I don't think we did any repeals.
It's underlined, is that underlined?
That's
No,
current law. and-
That's what I just want to make sure.
So something new that's before you for the first time here is, there's going to be a change. For for $2 million off kind of off the top of property transfer tax revenue. Here's the language. That's adjusted for inflation, so that 2 million would increase over time, and Department of Taxes would be responsible for tracking that. The way that this works, there's already, I think, as Ted mentioned.
Yeah.
There's 2.5 million off the top for the Vermont Housing Conservation Trust Fund already. I had to make a judgment call about what order to put things in. So for this language, the trust fund would come first to 250 million, which is current law. And then 200 million would come next for the Act 250 permit fund.
2 million.
So the next 2 million off the top, yes.
Okay, I think you said 200 million or something, so I just 200. I don't remember.
Savannah could do some stuff. Yeah, it's like exciting.
What construction?
Did I say, oh my goodness. Then 2 million for the Act 250 permit fund. And then there's another off the top amount that goes to PDR for administration. As we discussed before, those things get moved around and not bestowed in budget sometimes, but that's the way that this will work in that order.
And just so people know, Act 250 permit fund is existing language. It already exists, but we're just giving them a chunk of funds. Without losing the fees that would go on Act 250.
And so that's aside from one other thing that I think Ellen included for you, that's the committee's tax proposals that I've worked on you with so far. So what would come next in the strike hall that you would be giving soon are the administration's proposals. To quickly go through those, there's two major proposals, although it's across several sections within the bill. The first one is a property tax exemption that effectively freezes new construction and rehabilitation. The value of properties that have been rehabilitated or new construction for a period of 5 years freezes those values in the grand list. That's how that exemption will operate. Again, that's the administration's proposal.
See, once it's been appraised,
Yes,
who determines the value of the house?
Grand list.
So it's the appraised value, the assessed value.
We
yes.
have
Okay.
Commissioner of DHCD nodding. We can try and squeeze in a couple minutes with Commissioner Bolio. Right, and it's going to finance, so, but it's fair to ask questions about the
So
mechanics.
assessed value of a new home for 5 years, frozen.
Yes,
Right.
if you build in a blighted area.
Right,
Oh,
It says new construction or rehabilitation.
new construction.
Oh,
So that's basically all construction,
It's, but it's
all residential
It's
construction.
it's limited, it's limited to certain areas, such as designated downtowns, village centers, neighborhood development areas, and new market tax credit areas.
So it
so
says
it's-
somewhere.
Yeah. So it is based on where that new construction or rehabilitation takes place. I could go into more detail, but I thought you wanted to.
did we get the fiscal note on, or the fiscal impact on this, Ted?
What is the fiscal impact?
I have,
thought it was-
I know it's $1 million for fiscal year 25. I know it ramps up at a certain point.
Okay.
I don't have the chart pulled up,
Yeah.
Pat, so if you want kind of the out years.
Yeah.
But I know it's 1 million in fiscal year 25.
But it's also, I mean, that's what we're partly encouraging by this, is that we would assume it would ramp up.
We would assume it would ramp up. Pat, do you wanna?
Yeah, so just as you're all acutely aware, I'm sure development takes time and there's lags to all this, so it is a relatively small impact in the first year. It's the 1 million, like Ted said, but over time, 5-6 years down the line, we are talking about like a $16 million tax expenditure.
6 years in chronological time, but they only get a 5-year.
Exactly, so yeah, it's just
Right.
as you
Mhm.
accumulate more projects that have been done in these areas, it accumulates over time.
Yeah.
so with the ed fund.
Yeah, I mean, I would,
Yeah.
like,
So,
Yeah.
I guess if it's up to me, whether it's here or finance, I would limit the number of years more.
yes,
Because I'm worried about a 5-year exemption right now. with
To the
our
ed fund?
changes to the ed fund.
I got it.
Um,
100%
So we,
tax
you know, we have a couple minutes and I don't wanna constrain conversation on this. It's a big
Yeah,
deal.
and as a person who's not gonna be in those
Right,
finance
exactly,
conversations and just heard about this.
Yeah,
I have big concerns. So is it gonna hurt municipalities? Like,
meaning, will the municipal tax be
Yeah.
locked?
yeah, well, it's the
No.
grand list value.
We have no control over that.
No,
But you're using the grand list value.
so,
Alex, just.
oh, sorry, and maybe Commissioner Bolio's better.
Or
chime
just
in,
say
but-
no, and you don't have
Yeah.
to.
So-
vote
The
it.
municipality has a choice.
I would say also it could benefit them in some, I'm not trying to just, you know,
Yeah.
but they could see more development happen that increases their municipal tax, because then we're not exempting the municipal tax.
So-
Okay,
we don't
but
have the power
but
to
the
do that.
value
You are
is staying
decreasing-
lower.
If you're freezing the value, you're affecting the municipal
Yes,
tax.
you
It's,
are.
it's only freezing for the state.
Under
Yeah.
under this
Same
language, the municipality could choose to have it frozen for the municipal property taxes,
Okay.
or it could choose not to.
But if they have a new CLA, they're getting more money unless they
Right.
act affirmatively otherwise.
By default, the municipality would continue to get the new value unless they
Right.
opted to also keep it frozen like the state is. But it's only the state keeping it frozen for their
Right,
purposes.
so just
So it's
picture
like
like
a-
the
It's like a
assessor,
tip.
the lister, whoever,
Yeah.
they're, the town evaluator could come and say, look at this brand new property and add it to their grand list and collect a municipal tax as soon as
So-
it's ready.
The
Would they have the discretion to do it for
properties would be
each
valued
property?
normally, they would be valued normally.
So each property,
But
the
the
municipality.
previous value would be frozen in time, but they would still be valued normally by the municipality.
So the
So
education.
the grand
fund
list would have two numbers on it.
Yes.
Well, it hasn't now. I mean,
Well,
okay.
no.
The grant, for the education grant list would have the frozen value, I believe, put in there.
Well, I mean, we have a problem. We can't even get one other value, but that's a discussion, right? Is how you just
But
monitor it.
the intent of the mechanics of it is that we don't,
It would actually be I'm sorry, to answer the question,
Yeah.
the full fair market value would be plus the grant levy in this language.
Okay, so then there'd be some sort of deduction made in the 5 years to true up to the,
that's a
So what
Commissioner
year?
Bolio question, I think, but.
Okay.
But, you know, in the language,
Okay,
there's
so-
no removal of the grand list value.
all right, so then at the end of 5 years, what would be the value? Would it be the value that it was?
It would be what the current value is at that point, fair market value with no reduction.
Okay, and is this one of those things where it's not shown in the budget? Where tax
The shadow budget.
credits aren't shown in the budget?
Well,
Yeah,
they're showing
they're
as
like
tax,
negative.
tax expenditure.
Yeah,
Tax
Right,
expenditure,
right,
money
right, but
goes
it's a
to what?
separate document. So it's just not as known as the budget.
I'm still waiting for a study that tells me that having to pay a higher property tax when your property increases in value is keeping people from creating, reality.
Right. Right. I have a lot
There's
of.
a few individuals that will keep their house like that.
I'll let Senator Clarkson go. If somebody from I think we're no longer arguing about the language. I could be wrong. We might still have questions about the language, but after Senator Clarkson, maybe we can hear Commissioner Bolio or somebody speak to this. Senator Clarkson.
So, out of the ed fund. This is a terrible year to be proposing anything to come out of the ed fund. I would propose this be considered to come out of the general fund. And I would propose we do it for 3 years.
I don't know how we would mechanically take it out of the general.
It would, if you want to give something, rather than take money out of the ed fund, you just grant it. Give them a credit on their income tax.
Okay.
It's always the ed fund that is being looked at to development. And this year, the ed fund is in very bad shape.
So I want Commissioner Bolio or some commissioner to
Address
speak
that
to this.
question.
Okay, but I'm also proposing that at least for the moment, we're
And
gonna.
he's already
for 3
told me,
years.
look
3 years,
forward to
okay.
that one.
Commissioner Bolio, I think, or Abby or somebody.
I'm happy to speak to any of
Do you wanna
those
finish the
elements.
walk?
There is, can we hear?
No, we
I
can't
think
hear.
let's just go to this because I don't know that. Or do you have real important, like,
Yeah. he's got-
nuances to the wording that you want to share with us, or we've heard the concept now?
No, it's just that there are other items. that we
Oh, there's
can
other
walk through.
items.
Yes.
So let's
This one
finish
is
with-
not gonna
Yeah,
be
sorry,
decided
Commissioner.
here, So don't waste.
Okay, so yeah, let's hold the philosophical conversation until,
Because that's the first part of the administration's proposals, and the second part was the property transfer tax exemption for blighted properties.
I thought we talked about that already.
For how many years?
Well, it
I
would
think
be,
that's a
it
one-time
would be an
transfer tax.
exempt transfer. It's a-
Is it
Right,
when
that's
you
the
buy
blighted
the
property.
blighted property or when you sell the blighted property that you've turned into luxury condos?
The buyer.
It's a transfer of blighted properties that the transferee, the purchaser,
Yeah,
certifies will be rehabilitated
okay.
for occupancy as principal residences and not as short-term rentals, provided the rehabilitation is completed and occupied not later than 3 years after the date of the transfer.
Okay,
Let's stick to the language questions for Kirby.
so I'd just like to finish my year's thought.
Yes.
It is, how many years do we wanna do this before we assess its productivity and what it's actually accomplishing for us? So I would like to put in,
Do you mean the rehabilitation is completed and occupied no later than
Yes,
3
how
years
many
after the
years?
transfer?
I wanna assess if this is actually producing the result we want, which is people buying blighted properties and doing stuff with them. So I'd like to put a 10-year review on this. I think it needs some time. I'm up.
Okay.
But I do think we should put a check into it, a sunset into it, to look and see if it's working.
Okay, so that's like a language proposal on the table. Any other questions for Kirby? Are there other sections?
I don't have the language here, but there was the income tax exemption or exclusion for the medical deductions.
If you look on the committee site, you can find the doc posted that contains that.
It's posted now.
So member,
So this-
that's the long-term care.
When we talked to the tax commissioner, hear from him, the clawback or if 3 years after the date of transfer, the rehabilitation has not been completed, then tax imposed shall become due.
So no more
That's-
questions for Kirby.
I don't know how that would go to. That seems like a pretty awkward way to enforce this. I mean, it could be a corporation that's not in
Is
existence.
it a Kirby question?
I don't know.
Kirby is. I do wanna move us along.
I mean, my answer would be that the department will have to figure that out.
Okay,
So-
right,
so that's,
Okay, any more questions for Kirby? Kirby, any more things you need to say, but you can stay on.
Unless you're okay with like, not seeing the language in the medical deduction you've seen before.
Nothing has changed on that section.
That
The
is
last
not
we
changed.
Commissioner.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hi, Craig.
Hello.
How is it over there with the great view?
It's lovely. Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner. So I heard a number of questions. I'm not sure where to start. Let me try to tackle the ones that I have in my memory off the top of my head. So in terms of number of years for the value freeze, I would note that there's a dozen states around the country that use a very similar program in terms of freezing value over a period of time for the purpose of construction and rehab of residential units. And this proposal at 5 years is already one of the shortest in the country among all of those programs. Most of them freeze for 10 or 15 years. So I think we've already taken a conservative approach here of doing 5 years. The
When
program
we
also.
get to finance with this, it would probably be good to have that list and the number of years so that finance can consider.
I would look at the community.
Do not
Right.
finance their education system on the property tax.
Fair.
I would also note that this program sunsets the value freeze program, so there are no new applications accepted after 2027. So it's really a short-term program intended to jumpstart construction and rehab of these units.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll have a more robust debate on the Ed Fund and Senate Finance. You know, I am not blind to the acute problem that we have in the Education Fund this year, but I would highlight the consensus numbers that tax and JFO are at for fiscal year 25, a 1 million cost in the Ed Fund, fiscal year 26, 1.8 million. Those are very modest costs, I think, when the problem that we're looking at is 250 million. That is not going to add a significant amount of additional pressure but can be a valuable tool in solving the long-term problem we have in the ed fund as well, which is we need to have one of the solutions, one of the strategies I think that we all agree on employing is construction of additional units and more organic grand list growth that can help offset property tax pressures in the out years. So my point would just be, understanding we've got two problems, right? The acute problem of this year and the long-term problem. Let's not sacrifice one of the potential tools to use to help solve the long-term problem because we're worried about what it'll do in the short term, because I think the cost is very modest for this year and next year. Were
So
there
we
other
can,
questions that are worth hitting, Madam Chair?
we can have 5 more minutes of discussion on this, and I understand that's a short amount of time, but questions of discussion.
I guess just the administration cost of this and how many units are proposed to be recovered or built with this.
The administration costs for which proposal, or you just want to hear both?
The revenue from the blighted properties being exempt.
There's
From the
both.
property transfer
Right,
tax?
right.
That
Actually,
I don't
mean, you're
envision
just-
that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Either one or both, and I mean, if you said that you have projections of the cost or the loss in revenue. So that must be based on a number of units. Or at least buildings that would be rehabbed.
Yes, so when we're figuring a tax expenditure, right, we need to figure out what activity is already projected to happen. And that's the projected cost for the tax expenditure. The purpose of the tax expenditure is to get additional private investment on top of the public investment, right? So the $400,000 projected revenue loss for the property transfer tax exemption is again consensus with JFO based on the estimates we have today for number of blighted properties rehabbed. That would represent that exemption, we believe, would represent a somewhere between 1% and 3% of the cost savings of investment likely required to rehab units. So if you get a similar increase in the number of rehabs, you'd be talking probably 10 units a year. So at a $400,000 tax expenditure, you'd be talking about units coming online for $40,000 a piece, and you'd get $5 or $6, I think, of private investment for every dollar of public investment. On the value freeze,
That's a good leverage.
Oh, sorry.
That's a good leverage. I like that leverage, 5 to 1.
Yeah, we do too. That's one of the reasons that it's part of the proposal. For the value freeze, I'm sorry, I appreciate the flexibility this morning. I wasn't able to be in the room, but it can be hard. I'm not trying to speak over people, so I apologize if I do. On the value freeze, as you heard, the cost ramps up. We believe that represents about a 7 or 8% cost savings, just the education fund side. So as you heard earlier in the discussion, the value freeze as written today only exempts the properties from education tax. It allows municipalities, if they wish, to have a matching exemption. But let's take that out of it for a second. Just the education fund savings over the course of 5 years depends town to town, but generally you're going to be talking about a 7 to 8% cost reduction for construction. So again, if you get a similar amount of increased construction and rehab, you'd be getting units at about $80,000 a piece, and you'd have somewhere between $12 and $14 of private investment for every dollar of public investment. So, we have some projections for new units and we have the projections for the costs, but we think it creates units at very attractive prices and leverages a lot of private investment for the public investment that we're talking about.
Senator Cummings, and then I think we have to call it to question.
We have VHIP, which I've been told is very successful. And how many units have we rehabbed? Does anybody have a list of how many units there are out there that needs to be rehabbed? And why do we feel we need to add this extra investment from the education fund?
I think Commissioner Farrell, we heard 535 units have been rehabbed through VHIP. I think Maura would tell us that something like 19% of our overall housing stock is blighted or not up to code or needs repairs to be fully habitable.
Yeah.
Commissioner?
That sounds about right, but I'd also say, I think this achieves something very different than VHIP, where VHIP can go in for particular units and the entire property might not be blighted. Plus, this has other geographic means of narrowing it. So this focuses in areas where VHIP is not restricted to a certain qualified census tract or a specific designated area. This is really focused on trying to bring a blighted neighborhood back.
Or this could be rural areas that don't.
Exactly.
I've seen an awful lot of blighted homes being lived in rural areas, but
Often they're not
Rehabbing-
changing hands.
yeah,
and we wanna help
rehabbing them is not going to add to the housing stock. They should be rehabbed. Humans shouldn't be living in them. But that's not gonna add to the housing stock.
So this actually could. So if, for example, you're buying the blighted property and then constructing on it, say a multifamily building, that would add significant number of units. And Craig, I can't remember. I mean, I know we've tossed around some internal projections. Do you have anything on hand of what we think this could on an annual basis produce?
At a 7 or 8% increase from the value freeze, you'd be talking 200 units a year. That's what gets you to the 80,000 per unit. With $12 to $14 of private investment for every dollar of public. On the property transfer tax exemption, our projections are 10 units a year.
Senator Clarkson.
Thanks, Craig and Alex. I think this has got a lot of merit, but I'm just curious, are we requiring that the blighted property be used for housing redevelopment? And
No.
it's that language is in there, sorry, I missed that, okay.
So,
So
okay,
it can't be done as a commercial.
That's right.
I'm gonna call it a question. I think the question on the table is, can you live with this going to finance and still vote for the full bill? One thing that was said by the commissioner that made me think this has additional value, especially in rural areas, is people are having a hard time selling blighted properties. If somebody knows that they can get a little bit of a break to buy a real fixer upper, we have houses moving very quickly in our internet served areas, et cetera, but we have a problem where blighted properties kind of sit on the market
But
elsewhere.
I buy a blighted property in a very nice location. Buy it, tear it down and build a McMansion for me.
I don't know all of the details of, you can do it for a single family home under this proposal.
But can I do that for so I live in it?
Yes, under this proposal, and when it gets to finance, we could take out single family homes or personal use, we could look at the number of years. But yes, right now it is housing for you or others, or a multi-unit or single family property anywhere in the state.
So it may be more control we might
And-
put in.
right,
At any price.
Yeah.
I didn't hear
Well,
any.
I think the estimate is because the blighted properties have lower value when they're
At the
sold.
beginning, but at the end, there's no requirement for any sort of rent or price limit.
I would,
No, but the affordability,
Commission,
okay,
yeah.
there's no affordability at the end of
Let's
this
let the
process.
commission answer that.
Yeah.
there is a requirement for mixed use buildings to be mixed income, so there does have to be a share of affordable units to qualify for the value freeze.
For mixed use buildings, so I'm sorry, we haven't seen the language, it's really hard.
Do you wanna okay, can we print out, look at that? So I would say folks can look at the language while we go to other sections. So we can stay on time. And I can leave the question on the table since we're voting on the whole bill at 11. And you can, signal if you need to communicate. Did we lose Kirby?
Yeah.
Okay.
You want me to-
I would say we don't need Kirby right now. Can people look at the language as we go, and then if you need Kirby back, we might go to lunch and get Kirby back at lunch before voting. So we're gonna move on to did I lose a copy of the bills? Thank you. So John, we're gonna put John in the witness chair and go over the whole bill, which has those tax sections in it, as I understand it. Now we're on draft 1.1 of SB 11. And as you're working on getting this up, John, the highlighted sections are any changes made between S311 as it was introduced and now this.
That's right.
Moving from this draft. That's, okay.
Yep.
Why, John?
Hello,
Long time to see.
how's it going? John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. Happy Friday.
This hasn't gone through editors.
Correct.
Does it matter that on line 3, it doesn't have the title of the bill?
Ellen's already
Okay, great, okay.
got that.
Great, okay, sorry.
We have a marked up version with the highlighting, then we have a votable version, and the votable version has the.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this is the highlights.
So my sections start at section 40, and that's on page 47.
okay.
I am screen sharing, so if you guys want to just look at the screen, you're also
Okay.
welcome to do that.
I think it needs to be a little bigger.
Okay, sure.
Oh, it needs to be a lot bigger.
Okay.
Ted had the right amount.
That's good.
Fine, Ted's fine.
It becomes difficult for me to manage on my screen.
Oh, I see, okay.
Um,
Well,
but that's fine.
great.
That's great.
You guys
Great
need to
having
be able
you.
to see, so.
Section 40, page 47.
So small tweak to the language in VHIP. I'm not gonna go through obviously things that we haven't
Yeah,
changed, just give
just
it time to change.
highlighted.
At the top of 49, you'll see highlights. This was a request to make clear that the 70,000 per unit cap was specific to commercial conversion purposes. I did expand that language to say for any unit converted from commercial to residential purposes to make clearer that it was from residential, that it wasn't some vague commercial conversion concept. And then we retained the $50,000 per unit cap for any other eligible rental housing unit. Under B, I just,
Sorry, and just on that, eligible is ADUs and or
yes.
full-time rental apartments.
And under B, I did strip out, we previously had language to say, and shall consider, whether it's for commercial conversion purposes, given that we're setting up this, divided section to have a $70,000 cap for commercial conversion purposes. I didn't feel the need to retain that language because it's clear that that's going to be factored
Right.
into 1A1. Yeah. Let's see, I will jump down to and try not to cause motion sickness.
51.
51, top of 51. This is a request from VHFA. So this is the section on the middle income home ownership development program, which is administered by VHFA. There was some concern that the agency wouldn't be in a position to reject applications for subsidies with this increased flexibility to go above the 35% capped. The language here is just to say that the agency may, at its discretion, reasonably exceed this limitation. I would say it doesn't necessarily add content to it, but it makes VHFA feel more comfortable in saying, in our discretion, we reject this application. So this maintains the concept in the existing draft, but I think provides comfort to VHFA that they're in a position to say no to requests that go above 35.
Just to let people know, I think Ellen's sections have a little more like meat to the changes.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna try to have Ellen come in at 10:20.
And Ellen's new sections are in here.
They're here before section 40, so.
Right.
And I will try to be quick. I do have, when we get to it, I'll talk about a more substantive section.
Right.
But yeah, I'll try to be.
Page 53.
So we have new appropriations, section 45. In the previous draft, we had altering language for the middle income homeownership development program, which we retain here. But this now adds an appropriation of 10 million. For that program, previously there had not been any appropriation.
I think that's something fine.
That was a different section.
Okay.
It
Uh,
probably doesn't get as much.
Yeah, no, and that's part of the challenge with it. It's so expensive.
Section 46 is for VHCB, for federally affordable housing. And the language that we have here is, so it's 40 million appropriated to VHCB. And the language that we have is provided by VHCB, trying to set up some guardrails as to what that could be used for. But given that it's not going to any particular program, but is part of a general effort, so to provide support and enhance capacity for the production and preservation of affordable rental housing and home ownership units. and to fund the construction and preservation of emergency shelter for households experiencing homelessness.
And VHCB helped work on the purpose
Yep,
language.
this is specifically from.
Which is great.
It mirrors the budget language from last year.
Great. Harkens back. Okay.
And so
let's-
even, and I'm just gonna point out that VHCB has said to us, they need 125 to keep moving in the right direction for us to supply the demand.
125 is VHCB and VHFA, but yes, let's.
So, anyway.
We're not gonna argue that.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
this is a,
Keep going.
not fully what we need, but it.
But we're not even gonna get too deep into the numbers because this is a session-long conversation with the appropriation.
I'm just
So
saying.
let's keep going.
So new appropriation, section 47 for the rental housing stabilization services, 400,000. This tracks Budget Adjustment Act. Similarly, section 48 is for the tenant representation pilot program, 1.5 million. And again, tracking the Budget Adjustment Act in those cases.
So these three appropriations we see until we get to landlord relief, just to remind everyone, are the ones we discussed with legal aid in the BAA that did not make it in the BAA. Again, ongoing conversation.
Section 49, I think this was a reduction to 2.5 million for the rent arrears assistance fund. And similarly, in section 50 to 1.1 million. Obviously, we had these appropriations previously in, but just modifications to the figures that were there. At section 51, we do have a new appropriation. This is for the first generation homebuyer program, $1 million to DHCD for a grant to VHFA.
Well, not new, we discussed it and agreed to it.
Yes, it wasn't in a previous.
Supporting an old program we've had.
And BBSR wrote to us to support this appropriation then in the middle income homeownership program. Just want to note that our records.
And just so I'm not confusing it, when I say new, I just mean new to the draft, not
Yeah.
that it is specific to any new program.
We appreciate it.
Rental data collection and protection. So this was previously in,
Right.
two draft back, our rental registry. This has been reduced down to a landlord certificate, a beefed up landlord certificate. You'll see the changes at subsection C. Previously, this was under subsection F, which is where information will be provided to the public upon request. Setting out these details, because we're making this confidential, that section has been removed, and instead what we require is just the certificate to set out these requests for information. And will be maintained confidentially by the Department of Tax. I will note the specific call out for top 57 gross monthly rent per unit, which was one of the specific requests here, and we did include ADA accessibility. Otherwise, these information pieces track what was in the previous draft. It's just in a new subsection for that confidentiality reason.
Okay, so that, because we couldn't land on a place, it still has Vermont Emergency Management and the Department of Housing.
I'll show that. Yep. So,
I thought they said March.
I got language from Commissioner Bolio.
Okay.
March 31st.
Well, let's.
Yes. So the last piece of that section is for a report to
Got it.
you guys in House General. This is aggregated data, so this is not the confidential piece. This doesn't set out people's identifying information. This is annually on before December 15th. This does track the language that I had received from Commissioner Bolio. Obviously, that's something that comes up. It's easy enough to change that if we want to match the March 15th or 31st elsewhere. The confidentiality piece is contained in this next section, section 53. So the tax title already has in place confidentiality restrictions for tax records, and that's what you see here. So this is just adding this piece, which will fall under the definition of returned information, which Title 32 applies confidentiality to. So the landlord certificate will fall into this category, return information, and then when we jump down to subdivision 9 here on page 59, you'll see that annually on or before March 31st, that will be disclosed by the commissioner to Vermont Emergency Management, DHCD, and any organization then under contract with DHCD to carry out the statewide or a statewide housing needs assessment. And we have this limitation to what the purpose is for, provided the disclosure relates to information collected on the landlord certificate for the purpose of emergency management. So it's just going to those entities for particular purposes and drawn exclusively from the landlord certificate.
It might be just nuance, but the purpose for emergency management is emergency management. The purpose for DHCD is housing needs assessment.
Okay.
Do you feel like that's written that way or,
I would want to change that.
okay,
That's.
yes.
Yeah,
But that we were clear on.
I mean, the landlord's gonna ask, why is emergency management getting my rents? I think you do say for, communications during
Right.
an emergency.
We have Commissioner Bolio and Abby. I think the discretion is still with the tax department to decide that we're giving this information that relates to emergency management. We're giving this information aggregated that relates to housing needs assessment. Let me ask, I'm kind of asking a question. Do you feel like maybe we could just clarify this whole section and make it more explicit that when it goes to Vermont Emergency Management, it's just fields related to,
Name,
yeah,
it needs to, they need to be able to contact them and they need to know the unit size. I mean, they need to know the location, they need to know the, how to contact.
I think we need to be a little more general.
We had talked about,
I think we can leave it up to the tax
Purpose of
department.
emergency
And
response.
Yeah, yeah,
Emergency communications, right?
exactly. Well, or emergency needs,
Yeah.
or response.
He said,
But we've talked about specific,
we did talk about
Areas
specific fields,
that we
but I
could-
think we should leave it up to the tax department and finance can talk more about it.
So if we want to tweak here, it would just be to say to Vermont Emergency Management for the purpose of emergency communications, whatever.
Yeah.
we want to do.
that.
Yeah.
And then,
I like communication.
and then to DHCD and any contracted agency for purposes of statewide housing.
Could to
Okay,
correct the
so
housing,
just-
exactly.
okay.
just say, can we just say emergency management, because it might be
Yeah.
other than
It
communication.
might be bigger than.
Management and communications.
Okay, I mean, it currently says
I would
emergency
just leave it
management.
this.
Okay, let's leave it at what we look.
I
And
assume
if
that
we
the
can
more-
have a more conversation in finance if we feel like this is concerning for confidentiality.
And if the tax department has any input for finance, thinking about how to better define or put fence around it, we can deal with it there.
I mean, I think the more personal questions we ask, the more we're going to decline the amount of certificates we get back.
And we can have that whole conversation in finance in case that whole committee
This comes out
feels
right.
concerned. And
May
we will
not
have
be
that
right, but
conversation.
We've got it.
And isn't this Bolio's language?
Yes,
Yeah.
well, so he
Oh,
it's
Apple.
bracketed for, purpose of X, like I supplied what the purpose is,
Okay.
but the form is.
So we'll continue, we're okay with this, with the change that separates the two. And this conversation will continue in finance.
May I just weigh?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Abby Shepherd, Department of Taxes. I just wanted to point out this is within the subsection in our confidentiality statute that makes it mandatory. So I'm glad you are getting into the weeds on this because
Yeah.
this is the subsection that gives the commissioner slightly less discretion. There's a different subsection we consider.
Okay,
So we do appreciate
so
that.
we might want to be explicit about the fields. We won't have time to do that today, but
We talked about 1 through 7 would be what I would propose.
you
that-
can.
Yeah.
Tell
If it's fields or just having the purpose
Right.
specific to which
Right.
entity is receiving
So
the.
to be continued, but we're okay with a little bit more generalization here and we'll make it more specific. Short-term rentals.
Okay, so short-term rentals, section 54, this is just to add a definition to title 20, which is where those rules specific, the authority for rulemaking for rental establishments generally is located. So this is just pulling in that STR definition from title 18, so that in section 55, we can set up a requirement that Division of Fire Safety provide guidance on the rules governing health and safety, sanitation, and fitness for habitation. These rules already exist, so this is just trying to provide a concise form of those rules.
Right.
To any online platform or travel agent hosting or facilitating the operating of a short-term rental in the state. And then any online platform or travel agent hosting or facilitating that short-term rental would make available the guidance to a short-term rental operator. Under subsection C, that rental operator would be required to both physically post the guidance in a conspicuous place in that short-term rental and provide the guidance as part of any offering or listing of the SGR in the state.
Great.
They,
Good.
Flood disclosure, I should, I like the words good, so I'm.
Yeah.
we're in a good lane.
Don't let us think too much.
Yep, flood risk disclosure remains the same as previous drafts. There's no updates to these sections. So the next set of changes, we get to section 61. This is on page 64. Previously, we'd had a bipartite structure for the mirror appropriations to say 1 million for this particular program. The home improvement repair program to improve infrastructure, and another for the home repair award program. We've now just made this a general 2 million appropriation that they can then decide how to lock those within those programs. Technical assistance appropriation, this previously was a $1 million appropriation in total. It remains a $1 million appropriation in total to CBOEO for technical assistance programs. This has been updated to beef up that language and say what particular programs this applies to. We received this from CBOEO, so to fund the $700,000 to fund the mobile home park technical assistance and services team, including administration costs, and then 300, and that includes staffing, which is obviously a large expense for them. The sum of 300,000 for individual resident emergency grants accessible to all income eligible mobile homeowners to prevent loss of housing, remediate unsafe housing, enhance housing safety and habitability issues, and provide relief from the impact of natural disaster. So this section has just been updated to provide greater guidance as to what those funds will actually go to and cabin in some way. What they will use.
Can I just clarify, individuals can be individual mobile home owners or individual park owners?
Mobile home owners, the owners of the mobile homes themselves.
Okay.
Age restricted housing. So this is kind of the most substantive piece of the changes here. What we've done here is we previously had the right of first refusal, which is a relatively simple setup. What we have now is modeled on the mobile home community required notification in the event of sales. So what this does is this applies, and I can walk through the language, but in essence, what it does is creates a 60-day period in which any intent to sell a privately owned age restricted residential property would have to go to VHCB. VHCB would have a right of first refusal, but they could assign that right to a nonprofit housing provider. And then if either of those parties, so the board or its assignee, evidence an intent to sell within that 60-day period, it would preserve an extra 120-day period in which they could carry out diligence or other processes to determine whether or not they want to purchase the property. So I'll walk through the language. Age restricted property, privately owned age restricted residential property that is not a licensed care facility, and eligible buyers are nonprofit housing providers.
Are people okay if we don't walk all the way through this language and people skim it themselves?
And I could try to call out, let me
Yeah, we'll
jump
do
through
it
and
some
see.
call outs.
I did want to note, it doesn't, I know there was a concern in the previous draft about restricting the price. This is not meant to restrict the price which is offered. Notices the content of that notice set in subsection C. This is generally the things that I just described, so I'll.
Meaning content of notice.
The board does have the ability to notify that they are not interested in the property or that no assignee is interested in the property, and so that can cut short that 60-day period, so that you don't have to be tied to the 60-day period if there's no reason to look into it. There's a requirement to negotiate in good faith, consider any offer to purchase from the board or the assignee. And then there are exceptions, just to be clear, so we don't want to pick up foreclosure. At least this matches what's done in the mobile home statute, but this is trying to call out instances in which you wouldn't want to disrupt normal processes. So foreclosures, sell among family, joint tenants, eminent domain, and to preserve those pieces.
So actually, my concern still lies in section 64.
Okay,
So I think in my mind, the intent was still not to capture the subsidized age restricted housing.
oh, yes,
But
totally.
private and non-licensed. And by licensed, I'm talking about long-term care facilities
Right.
because they are already under strict scrutiny. This is private age restricted housing that does not involve licensed long-term care.
Yep, so it would be the same category as what's in the above section. Okay, yep, I can.
So this is for private, age restricted,
Non-licensed.
non-licensed.
Yeah.
Age restricted, there's senior apartments and there's assisted living. Does that fall under privately owned?
Yes, both. To the extent that they do not have a licensed long-term care component because they're regulated quite heavily.
I've been
Okay.
told nobody, Wake Robin is about the only place that does long-term care because it is so expensive and difficult to do that. So what most of what you have is, senior housing with a, assisted living component. You can go into them.
Right, and that's what we're talking about, but
Yes,
once you get
okay.
past assisted living to needing skilled nursing.
Yes,
We do have those elsewhere and
Yes.
they're already licensed and I
Right.
wanted to make sure they're not included in this.
so
And I think,
what are we trying? What are we trying to prevent or have happened? We're trying to
language,
prevent
yeah,
the sale to a for-profit group.
so we're, I don't know, so the last section was about right of first refusal. This section is about notification of rent increases for private senior housing.
Sort of like what we get from mobile homes.
What we get for mobile homes.
They're not gonna like that comparison.
Well, I think we like knowing before we go to a senior housing facility and they say, you know, our rent has gone up 18%. And like, they're telling us that.
Who do they have to tell that their rent is going up?
I think it's DHCD.
Oh, in this case?
Yeah.
This is going to VHCD.
DHCD.
So a form provided by DHCD to the board. So the reason that it's to the board is that
Yeah.
we were doing everything through the board in the section.
But that's
above.
right of first refusal.
Mhm.
Not not price increase
Yeah,
notice.
who's hang, I mean, we're gonna get this. They're gonna say our expenses have gone up. Our property taxes have gone.
And that's why, like,
Who's making,
yeah.
who's making this call?
So the call is not, you can't do that. The call is, we need to be proactively notified. Because I wanna start paying attention to this more. Holly.
I will just note that VHCB traditionally doesn't operate as a regulatory agency.
Yeah.
This is really outside of our programmatic
Yeah,
scope, so I'm wondering if this might.
you're talking about the
More
second section.
appropriately, yeah,
Yeah, I'm
DHCD.
sorry,
Yeah.
and this probably wasn't clear to John. I want this just to be DHCD.
That
makes sense.
And I want
that's
someone like Arthur Hamlin to tell his legislator, hey, you know, you have a senior housing facility and the costs are going up a lot. You might wanna pay
So
attention.
what am I gonna do when Westview Meadows sends me a notice telling me that their rent's going up $1,000 a month?
Well, they wouldn't tell you, they tell DHCD, and right now Arthur Hamlin does this with mobile home lot rent, et cetera. So that you
what am I
could go
gonna
talk
get
to your
notice?
constituent.
But what do? I get this notice. I've never known what I would do when Arthur Hamlin sends me something.
Some people Some
weren't
people
answered.
do. I mean, I think it's getting the information and them knowing that we're paying attention because I get very, I don't know about you, but I get very urgent messages way down the line about large rent increases for senior housing in my community without having had the chance to figure out who even owns it, how to talk to them. You know, I'd like us to start as a committee being more proactive about understanding rising costs of senior housing, since that's a huge part of our housing mix that is a bottleneck for getting single family homes available.
Sorry, Alex
Yeah.
Farrell, Commissioner Housing and Community Development. Senator, just so you know, with mobile homes, the reason one of the reasons we're notified is because there's essentially an annual threshold pegged to inflation that says if your lot rent increases exceed that,
Right.
then there's automatic mediation, or the unit owners have a right to mediation. But if it stays below that, there is no right to mediation, but we're just.
Okay, but I'm not sure why I get that notice. I can see where you get that notice. I can see where Office on Aging might want to know.
This language doesn't say they have to give us notice.
This does not.
It
say no.
says they have to start
Give notice,
It will be
DHCD.
DHCD.
but VA,
DHCD. Out.
them,
Yeah.
okay.
That's
But
them,
you're gonna get,
all in one.
some of them are high income places. A lot of them, people go in and they run out of,
That's exactly why we wanna do that.
well, but some of these places are carrying those folks on their endowment.
So nobody's gonna say this is necessarily a bad or inappropriate or unjustified thing. It just lets us know that it's happening proactively. And so if people can't live with that, I understand, if I give you permission to bring this back up in finance,
No, I'm not,
I just
I
wanna
just
start
think we
knowing.
need to be very clear about why we're asking them to notify us. Because there really isn't anything we can do about it in a private business.
We can have the data that says, wow, senior housing has gone up an average of
I think you
17%
just need
last
to
year.
be clear about why we are asking them to do this. If they think we're looking to do some kind of rent control, you're not gonna get a lot of responses of what happens if they don't respond.
I do need to move us along, so if you can't live with the fact that private senior housing needs to now tell us their rent increases, let me know, but I think our constituents would be happy to know that we're asking for more information about one of the most important forms of housing we have in the state.
You say we're going to request the information, and add a provision that says that there's no indication we're gonna do anything with it.
I think we
It
should,
doesn't make a lot of sense.
I think we should get this information, and I think there's a lot of potential. Financial harm, not just from the rent, but more from the structure of some of these developments. So I think this is a start. I think it's different than mobile homes, but I don't think it would hurt to start tracking.
And I think our constituents would welcome this, because at least when I hear from my senior housing folks, they are not even sure who owns them and where that entity is. And so when they get in notice of a rent increase, there's no conversation with them as a community. That's what I'm hearing, is these are now owned further and further away from Vermont. And so we always worry with short-term rentals, specifically about private out-of-state investment. Our senior housing that's privately held has more and more private out-of-state investment from New York and Texas and elsewhere. And I feel really strongly that we should start better understanding that and having some entity communicating with the state.
I would wonder if the Office on Aging.
I think DHCD is the appropriate body for now, and they are welcome to share this with Agency on Aging. Or Dale.
Yeah, whoever they are now, change their name every 3 years.
I just wanna make sure people are comfortable coming back at lunch. If we don't move.
No, I'm fine, I'll shut up.
No, I do, I'm just, as a process point, like, we'd come back at lunch if you wanna continue this.
Yeah, that's
So I'm basically wrapping up here. These are just small tweaks at the end to update from study to report to make clear these aren't legislative studies at section 65 and section 66. That's my
So you
section,
have-
so I can make just a few couple changes. And then obviously we won't wait. We won't, if there are other changes to other sections, we would want to compile it into one doc, so we aren't creating like version 2 and then version 3 in one day.
So as we get Ellen in the witness chair, what time do people wanna come back to vote on the full bill?
I have a meeting scheduled after.
Okay, so do you wanna say 12:45?
Will we be talking then?
This would be to look at the final bill and vote. So we could say 12:30.
Yeah.
Final bill.
Yeah, 12:30.
12:30, okay.
I do have to sub in house gov, I'm starting at 1, so I'm not sure.
They need to help us find some of the staff that it's not a problem. So
I'm meeting with GovOps, so.
at 1 something, right after, well, floor's 11:30, so 12:30,
One.
fine, yeah,
I'll have half of this.
12:30 to 1.
Finance is 1 o'clock.
Right, so 12:30 to 1 is when we put the final draft and vote.
Alright.
Is that okay with people? Okay,
Do y'all need me to relay anything to Kirby?
I don't think we had, did anyone have any changes for Kirby? And Wendy, you've looked at the section that, or you can look at that.
You talking about the tax?
Yeah,
Yes.
okay,
I will do my best.
okay, and you'll relay to Kirby maybe by noon if, and
It might,
yeah,
might Yeah, I'm not gonna have really questions. I just have, it's a philosophical.
Yeah, the town, the
So
town.
you're reading it so that you can,
I'm
When you-
trying,
you
yeah,
can-
to read it and listen,
Yeah.
yes.
okay,
Doing my best.
If you can do the tax, if it's a tax thing, you can come to finance.
right.
If it's any of the tax proposals.
Okay,
Put it,
okay, maybe,
so you have your lunch. and your
Right, well,
walks.
the question is, are you okay voting it out, the full bill, to get it to finance for more discussion on those?
yeah. Well, that's what I have to
Yeah.
figure out.
So, okay, so you have until 1 o'clock. And that probably leaves time to talk to
After
the
the
commissioners.
12:30 Committee start. This is.
Yes.
Friday.
Right, you have until 1 o'clock when we vote, like, you have until 12:55 when we vote. Okay,
All right.
Ellen.
All right, Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So, draft 1.1, there aren't that many changes in my sections. The first is on page 1, the words in areas served by municipal water and sewer have been struck.
But it's the land itself that needs to be served by water.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good one.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you for doing it.
next is on page 8. So section 7 previously was a section on reducing primary soil mitigation under Act 250 for certain wastewater systems. Now this is changed to a report. So on a report January 15th, 2025, the Department of Housing and Community Development, after consultation with the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets and VHCB and members from the regional planning commissions, shall submit a report to this committee and the House Committee on Agriculture, Food, Resiliency and Forestry, recommending appropriate updates to the ratios of mitigation for primary agricultural soil under Act 250.
Question.
I found out that primary includes prime and 2 other categories.
Great, and if you don't, just great, this will be a
We don't
fun
have to finish,
discussion
I just learned.
to be continued very
I know.
many years. That's great.
It includes prime and what else?
2 other things, but I'll
I'll tell you later.
And what's the next?
I have it.
Questions need to be
It
related
is
to the
a
language.
scale of 1 through 10. There's a whole formula for it. It's a pretty complicated process.
That's why we're giving it a year.
So, next on page 9, small change in section 9. The housing element shall include a recommended program for public and private actions to address housing needs and targets as identified by the Regional Planning Commission. So there's new language in section 11, which is on page 13. So this is the segment of the bill related to limitations on municipal bylaws. Last year you added emergency shelters to this section. Already in the bill, you've added hotels and motels converted to permanently affordable housing. And now on page 13, you're also adding facilities used for the purpose of sheltering or housing individuals for which the state is contributing a minimum of 50% of the ownership
So-
and operating costs.
So Ellen can only answer questions about what effect this language would have. AHS sent us this language and didn't give us a lot of time to consider it, so I can't speak for it. Maybe the commissioner can, but those are who you can ask questions of, and I don't,
Give a
it
typo.
came from AHS.
Yeah.
That's an editing thing.
Okay,
Send
but
your-
I am concerned if that means that the state could put Woodside in downtown, in any downtown it chose. Because that will definitely have an impact on the character of the neighborhood. Or if the state has a needle exchange,
That's not sheltering or housing people.
okay, so
Woodside,
it
but-
would be Woodside.
Yes,
And so the town would have no control if the state decided,
they would have lots of control, not the actual use of the facility. So they have all the controls in the beginning about setbacks, density, noise, height.
there are just, it is not appropriate to put a home for delinquent adolescents in a downtown next to a nursery school.
They can still regulate the location within their community. They just can't say this use cannot exist here.
Okay,
You could put Woodside, could you put a prison there?
it's,
Wait.
no, we can't put delinquent juveniles in prison.
No,
But
I'm saying, could you put a prison there based on
Yeah.
how
That's the Ellen question, I think, is does this
Yeah, I think,
definition?
I mean, it's
different?
pretty broad, so
Yeah.
So
potentially.
you could
Yeah.
put a prison downtown too, next
Or
to
any-
the school.
or anywhere in the community.
So you could propose excluding correctionary facilities, I don't know. I'm not saying we have to
You
include
think
this
through all
language.
the other things that you would wanna do.
Yeah,
So there may be areas in the designated downtown area that are served, like by the railroad tracks, or, there may be actually areas in downtowns that would be appropriate.
let's let the commissioner speak to this, and then we don't have AHS here to defend this language, and we will need to move on, and people can decide they don't want this language. I can't.
Yeah, I can do my best. Yeah, I mean, the intent here is that oftentimes, I mean, most of the facilities you're talking about, whoever's placing them also has an interest in where they're placed as well. They wouldn't necessarily say if, prison, for example, and if you want to call that out as exclusion, it wouldn't be convenient to have that in a downtown.
That's a.
I think the idea here is something like a recovery facility where we've contributed more than half of the cost, we being the state. And so it's, serving a public good in that sense.
Can I take a stab? What I believe this says is that you have to zone it somewhere in the town, but the town does get to put it in a particular zone, because look at the other ones. Hospitals, regional solid waste management facilities,
Hazardous waste.
Nobody
but
hazardous waste.
hazardous waste facilities, that it has to be somewhere in the town. You can't have.
The first thing they can regulate is location. They just can't say nowhere in our community can this exist.
I'm sorry, but not all towns are appropriate for a hazardous waste facility.
So I'm gonna ask,
That's already in there.
But
That's
that's
law.
one, that's on the list. So I'm saying these would be similar to that.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
and
say
which
town-
town is not appropriate is a very subjective matter, so I'm just gonna call this to question. And people can vote yes or no on if you are okay including this section, because the AHS is not here to tell us more. And it's a matter of, whether or not you want this section in the bill. Wendy?
I think this is okay for now. It'll be further discussed.
Yes, the whole session would be further discussed.
I'm a no, it's too broad.
Okay, Randy,
I don't like it.
are you a yes or a no?
I'm probably gonna be a yes for now, figuring again it can be fixed later.
Okay, I'm a yes, so that's 3 already. We can knock Alice out. And you can continue to raise this concern, and it has a long way to go.
It is not a finance area jurisdiction.
Well, you
It
won't
is
have,
not.
you,
It is, yeah.
that's right, I'm
I
not
just think
saying we'll
it's-
touch it in finance, but,
We're just doing an awful lot.
right. I think judiciary,
Municipalities, we have not
Yeah.
heard from the municipalities. And
well, we
I-
did, and they don't like it. So,
Oh, that's understandable.
VLCT has said they don't like this section
I
already.
don't like the section either.
Judiciary has an interest in this piece. Because when children can't be located in a different facility, they go to a prison in solitary confinement. And we have discussed that in justice oversight, so other committees have feelings about this. It sounds like we are moving forward with this language in the bill. For now.
Well, it's either that, or we simply say, we've taken really no effective testimony
Yeah, we
here. We
haven't.
haven't, and I'm just, that does make me uncomfortable, but they still have the opportunity to deal with this in the House.
So you're a no. You're a no to moving it forward so that the conversation can
I'm
continue.
inclined, the more I look, the more I read, the more inclined I am to say, I don't want to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
I said several weeks
And I
ago
think you're right, Ed.
that I think it's,
Why don't we table this, and AHS I thought would be here to speak to this language.
I'm
So,
messaging them now.
yeah, so I think loud and clear, we have heard from the towns, they don't like this.
That's right.
I think AHS would be the only other group we'd need to hear from defending this particular language. And then we can do a yes or no.
I can see a recovery site, nobody's making hospitals. Almost everything, until you get to groups that have they're confined for some socially inappropriate, they're not safe to be,
We do
In the
need to
general
move on. I think you've been heard on this and we'll take a yes, no vote on the section. We have other sections.
So the next change is on page 15. Section 15 has been cut down, and so now all that it says is a municipality shall allow for a lot coverage bonus of 10% on lots that allow access to new or subdivided lots without road frontage.
So this is a change I requested. It had other lot coverage allowances over 50, got up to 50% of the lot coverage. Planners really didn't like any of it, but I've left this 10% bonus if you don't have road frontage as a compromise.
That's fine, I didn't like the 50%.
Right, planners really like it. Okay.
So then the last changes are in the section regarding the Act 250 tiers. So first on page 21, in the road rule language, it's adding that the road rule will trigger jurisdiction if it's any combination of road or roads or driveways, which in combination is greater than 2,000 feet, and any single road or driveway is greater than 800 feet.
That's a BNRC request.
I don't like.
Okay,
I don't.
so
I would.
that makes you a no on the bill.
Yeah.
So sorry.
We're on page 21, the
Yeah,
road rule. I have a strong feeling that natural resources will put it back in and we can have that argument, but if you don't want it in
Put
this
back
bill,
in if they want to, and then we can.
are people okay with removing it for now?
I'm okay with the way it is.
I'm okay with the way it is.
The way it is, meaning adding this language.
Adding the.
Are we talking about adding line on 16, 17?
The highlighted.
So before it was just the 2,000-foot road rule, the NRC asked us to include that's 2,000 feet for a combination of roads, and they want 800 feet for a single road or driveway. So, and where are you? I just want to make sure.
I'm okay.
You want that language to stay in?
Yeah.
Same with me.
Yes, I want it to stay.
Randy, could you live with
Well,
it right now in the bill?
I think it's just, I'm not sure, the administration, I'm sure, is violently opposed to it.
Violently.
I'm not a violent guy.
Yeah.
Kind of a hugger, actually.
So far.
Yeah, but
So
I think NRB could probably.
NRB, can you say something?
Well, we didn't have a consensus on the 800.
Okay.
That was part of the
Okay.
problem, is that
Yeah,
Right. And so it's veering off our consensus.
okay,
Consensus.
okay. So we have other pieces that veer off the consensus, to be fair.
Right.
That favor housing. Why don't we let this one simmer? And people can discuss this between now and 12:30, and we can decide if it's unlivable, and I would like us to have a unanimous vote on the bill. So,
I think, yeah, it obviously will run into an issue in natural resources where I think.
could you accept 1,000 feet in this section?
we let it sit.
I'm gonna simmer on like, can we find
Can we
prices?
land somewhere
Yeah.
together and fair, and it's on the low burner.
Yes, low burn, thank you.
The other one was the downtown furnace flying about.
Sorry, I had to get the list.
So that's about the certain facilities, and we're gonna ask AHS to come in and defend it, and otherwise.
So this is about our Woodside, possible
Yes.
Woodside or
Yes.
correctional facility.
Yes, so we're not gonna,
Hazardous waste facilities.
but that already exists,
Okay.
so we're not changing existing law in that section. And
Towns
we
can't
will,
refuse to have a hazardous waste facility.
that already exists
No,
in
that's
law.
what I meant when I was saying that.
They can't,
Well, they need, we should have someone to interpret make sure what I'm saying is accurate, but my understanding is that you have to provide for it in some zoning, in the town, you have to provide for those.
I think Ellen can speak to that, because the section is on all of the things you can regulate, just not the actual use.
Right, although I wouldn't frame it quite that way, I think it sounds like yours was mostly correct, though there has been legal disagreement on what location actually means when it plays out. Some towns have interpreted it differently. But it does limit the criteria on which a municipality can review and restrict for these types of facilities.
Right.
So it does only apply to municipalities that have zoning, but it limits overall how they can regulate these lists of facilities.
And that's where we'll leave it, and we'll return to it at 12:30, and we'll hope at that point AHF is in the witness chair for just a few minutes to speak to this before we vote. And we have the road rule issue, and now we're on page 23.
Oh, right, and so on the road rule, the other change in it was allowing it, exempting any roads within designated areas. The prior draft was limited to which designated areas it applied to. So then on page 23, the definition of tier 2 means an area as defined by the board and mapped by the municipality. So it matches the other definitions, which are very vague.
Yes.
Yeah. Understanding much work is being done and this bill is in its evolution. Stage 1.
But Ellen, if you do want to stop here and say,
Sure.
that you have a legislative concern about that, and I might use that technical path.
Oh, okay, sure.
I
So we haven't spent too much time on this because I thought you were going to provide more clarity in this section, but you have not. So I'll just say that when you're delegating authority to an agency to make rules or any kind of significant policy decision where they have to fill in the details, constitutionally, you need to provide enough parameters for there to be clear guidance to the agency, and that's part of the delegation authority as it's the separation of powers under the Constitution. So you have provided no standards here in these definitions for which the board to make decisions. It's nearly impossible, I think, for them to discern what you mean by these terms. So there is some language in section 24 regarding what should be included in the tiers, but were this bill to pass tomorrow and become law, I have concern that it would be struck down as unconstitutionally vague and an improper delegation. So I think if you're delegating any authority to the board to make decisions on what's included in the tiers, you have to provide them with some standards for how they make decisions on what the tiers are. So I'll just say that.
That's big. That's very helpful.
Right, and
But
there
at this
is,
point, I don't know what we are going to do because as we have discussed, tiers, all the tiers are getting they're getting more fully fleshed out in other committees. It's not fully our jurisdiction to do that. Would you actually boldly propose that we actually just get rid of this section? And knowing that the tiers are being addressed elsewhere, do we just get rid of the section so that we don't become improper and do an improper delegation?
okay, well, so this is sort of a chicken and the egg problem for me.
Right.
If your intent is to pass it to another committee for it to be worked on, I think that is fine. But I did just want to point that out where even before you would get to like a ruling on unconstitutionality, having it be this vague will invite a legal challenge.
Okay,
So if you want to take it out, you can.
so the cleanest thing at this point, I'm getting, is to take it out and make no reference to the tiers.
Well, it doesn't solve your problem because you're still asking in the next section for them to make some decisions. So
For both sections 23 and 24, we need to clarify the delegation.
yeah. So here's what could happen.
So what do you
So the
suggest?
language at the bottom of page 23 adds a new sort of layer.
Right.
So here's what could happen. So and Senator Rumsfeld got back, but
Well,
she
she'll be back.
saw this. So on or before December 15th, 2024, the board shall submit to the General Assembly proposed definitions for the tiers. These definitions shall address the need for a healthy vacancy rate and the conservation goals in Chapter 89, which is the 30x30 and 50x50 goals. In developing the definitions, the board shall conduct a public engagement process with focus on engaging renters, unhoused persons, and historically marginalized groups to hear input and receive feedback on the proposed tiers. Now, if what you're intending here is for them basically to bring you a report and not take any steps, I think that's probably fine. And essentially that would almost function as them bringing you language that then you would either enact or direct them to take further steps. Like if this is just functioning as a report, I think you're probably okay legally. But if this is bringing.
We're asking them to actually do something.
Well, and right, and I've been trying to sort out
Right,
legally
and-
what you mean by that, yes. So, yes, so this has become sort of more murky to me, and if your intent is to pass it to another committee to further develop, that's fine, but I was unclear.
I think you know that's our intent. Our intent is that this is step one of 4 or 5 committees of jurisdiction that are going to be weighing in on the tiers. Defining them possibly with, I know our chair is concerned about the public process and public engagement. I very much feel the committee process is a public engagement, however, it's not a public hearing. And I know she would like to make sure that there is at least 1 or 2 public hearings on the tier proposals at some point during our legislative process this year. So how do we accomplish that now, between now and when we have to vote this bill out? By simply reducing this on page 20, in section 24 by, instead of a report which will address the definitions of the tiers?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you could add the word report if you want.
I thought you were saying that
Yeah.
would save our bacon.
Sure, yeah,
So,
like on line 14,
yeah, or 15, that the board shall submit to the General Assembly a report.
okay.
I mean, I'm trying to interpret you and Keisha, and as you know, I'm the intermediary here. So I know, I have a sense of what she wants, and you do too,
Yeah,
and we're trying to make it a proper delegation, instead of an improper.
yeah,
So, I think maybe that's what we would do is ask them for a report on the definitions. Could we say that, or can we not
Sure.
qualify?
sure, no, yeah,
On
yeah, you can, the more specific you are, the better, I think, but, yeah.
Okay, and so I would say a report on the definitions and designations, or on the definitions of the tiers and the specific, well, because it's also the designations, but we don't need to talk about that here, I guess. Okay,
Yeah. I mean,
If we're done that, I got a question also, in this particular group. The last sentence in developing a definite board shall conduct a public engagement process with a focus on engaging renters, unhoused persons, and so on. I'm concerned that the focus should be on a broad spectrum of providers, including these categories.
yes, I think
Because
that's,
this makes it much too specific.
okay, yeah.
okay,
I wanted to knock on the door.
no, at the moment, as you
Yeah.
know, Ellen is telling us that sections 23 and 24 together are too vague and are an improper delegation. So to get to a proper delegation,
Mm-hmm.
in section 24, to go to your concerns and to balance the Constitution,
Mm-hmm.
I'm suggesting that on line 15, that the board shall submit to the General Assembly a report on the definitions for the tiers. Because Ellen says that is, a report is appropriate, but
Mhm.
not actually as delegating authority, our authority to
Mhm.
the board to do the
That's that.
definitions themselves.
Are people okay with that?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I added another piece here in the last sentence of section 24.
Mm-hmm.
18. And in developing definite, the board shall conduct a public engagement process with a focus on a broad spectrum of Vermonters,
Okay.
including engaging renters, unhoused persons, and excluded.
When you say a broad spectrum of Vermonters, do you want to include people who haven't moved here yet or are
You're not
in
Vermonters.
category situations because of prime housing?
They're not
Everybody,
Vermonters.
we're including.
Okay.
Yeah, everybody. We've been focusing on renters or homeless people, but
Well, you could say stakeholders so that we're not specific to.
At a certain point, you have to have moved here, you have to have skin in the game. And I've got a lot of skin in the game.
Okay, we'll consider those unhoused people. that are trying to move here. Okay, great.
Is that what you needed?
Sure.
Yes.
well, how-
Okay.
literally,
So there's a couple other changes in this section with the language. I don't know if you want to go through it.
You mean on pages 24, 25?
Yeah. So for October 1, 2025, the board shall adopt guidance on the process for designating tiers 1, 2, and 3. And it, instead of having the language be specific to which of those, it also changes the language on page 25 to say that there will be a process before the board for challenging designation decisions.
That takes out the word appeal. So, yeah,
I would suggest that shall adopt, I would just say the board shall adopt process for the mapping work. I mean, isn't that what we're wanting to do, is to have, so we can.
that's what's included in the rest of it.
I think designation is bigger than mapping, but includes.
Yes, yeah.
So let.
And then it's at a minimum including all these other things.
And guidance. Are you okay now with the guidance the way you used it?
Well, so guidance guidance is a form of, statement that a agency can issue without going through the full rulemaking process. So guidance documents are faster and they have less process involved. That was the suggestion from the chair, so.
And I think with the process where it comes back to us in this 2025 legislative session, I feel better about guidance being issued in the fall of that year.
So I'm hoping this will all be further along.
And so the change, though, to be fair, was rules to guidance.
Right.
And that was a suggestion from Charlie Maker that I agree with, but others can.
Yeah, I'm good.
The rules is much more aggressive.
And so that change is made throughout, strike all references to rules and have it be guided.
So, and I'll just say, I wanted appealing out because I think there's a disagreement on how far someone could take their concerns. And this is essentially positing that you can challenge this all the way to the NRB's decision, but it leaves out appealing it all the way to the Supreme Court, which is what the NRC has envisioned, that I don't agree with at this point, but others could.
That's interesting.
Challenge
I don't have a, yeah, it's going to be contentious. I just suggest you get the new board online before.
Yes, I got the new board.
First.
What new board?
And other bills have professionalization of the NRB that we will have
That's
a
not
chance to
our
review
jurisdiction.
later.
And so, however, we still keep the date, even though all that guidance and stuff doesn't happen finally until October of 25. We have this ambitious goal on page 27, on line 17, the using shall adopt the necessary maps for all the tiers, for all the communities. Well, 252 of them
In another year. And
by December 26th. It's ambitious.
And that the maps have to have local approval.
Yeah.
All, I think that's extremely ambitious.
But we need it. We need it.
we can't, I'm open to discussing the dates or getting.
There's not a penalty.
Right, and our exemptions are till
So
twenty
if they don't
2029
do it,
because
they
I'm
don't do it.
anticipating that it will
Do
not
we
be.
go ahead and do the
done.
maps without them?
No, they would need the maps to do that,
Yeah.
to adopt the map.
We are hoping that Charlie Baker, we're hanging a lot on you, Charlie Baker, if you're looking.
And again, we have a legislative session in 2026 where people could say, we are not going to be done with this by the end
And
of
they
the
can
year.
extend it.
We don't get property tax.
Right. I think 2026 is extremely rosy, but
But let's
I don't
leave
think there
it.
are changes now.
Let's leave it.
Yeah.
And then we get to taxes. Oh, 75, sorry.
Right, and then on page 29, 75 units matches the change that's in the prior section, so it's 75 units, up to 75 units, except for 1B in transportation portions.
That's up from 50, and for me, that's a discussion point with the Natural Resources Committees about their river corridor bill, which will take more of our current dense housing land out of development. And I'd like to then say 50 units, and the municipality ultimately gets to decide what's within their scale, is too low of a threshold for Act 250 if we need to get development out of core downtowns and designated areas because they're by rivers. Yes.
Cool. Understood. This is part of our interim measures,
No,
right?
this is when we define the actual tier 1B.
And you don't wanna wait until we do that definition?
No,
Okay.
because I think 50 units outside of our very core areas is too low considering what they want to do to take away our core areas for housing.
I think they wanna get folks not in the floodplain, get folks out of the
Yeah,
floodplain,
we
which
all
I
wanna
think
get
is,
people out.
that's.
I think we
good.
think it's noble, but we need to move them somewhere else. And I'm saying
That's
50 units until you get to Act 250 is too low. And the municipality can make that determination. And I have examples of 60-unit projects, 65-unit projects that would hit Act 250 on transportation corridors that are currently from their maps 1B that I think are perfectly within scale for certain.
Alright, hopefully they won't get built without water and sewer.
Of course not, and if this is 1B, we have in our interim measures 1B tracking with anywhere with municipal water and sewer. But this is, I think, still up to the municipality. They could have allowed way less.
Right.
But I can
There
give you an
some-
example right now of a project where the town's done at 60 units and the neighbors are saying, we will now take it into Act 250. And I think
No, I.
we need to talk about achieving scale outside of floodplains.
Right, I just don't wanna minimize the importance of getting people out of floodplains.
I'm not
think that
minimizing
needs
it.
to happen, whatever.
If we move them, we have to move them somewhere.
Sure.
And that's why I'm not
Agree.
minimizing it. I'm asking them to consider where we put people.
So I need to know if you're making language changes.
No, this.
Oh, this is it. Are we, can we get to taxes?
Then we get to taxes, then we're done.
We have a few language changes that are small from what I was here for.
Well, did you decide about,
The
it
report
sounds
on,
like, I meant like, you're hearing from AHS?
so we,
Yes, road.
so the road rule and AHS are our two areas that we were gonna let simmer until 12:30.
Right.
One would involve a witness right at 12:30.
Trying to get them.
It's gone if they don't come in at 12:30 and talk to us. And one is just a simmering, possible other feet number, or possible we take it out and let that fight happen elsewhere. That's where we are, but we have small language changes that we looked at around 12:30.
I mean, just the word report and broad spectrum.
Yes.
So. And the report, yeah, you got it.
And the exemption, the tax, the value increase exemption.
I'm
That's not for me.
No, that's not for you, but.
Oh,
it's on
Have you
our-
communicated that to whoever needs to
Can you
hear
tell
it?
me what you're saying, Wendy?
The language on, starts on 39, that's what we're talking about today, right?
We're talking about
That-
everything.
That's the new, right, but that's the new
Tax.
news today. Is the value increase exemption.
Well,
You mean
that's
the section that I'm asking people to read on their own and
that's
ask questions
the,
before 12:30?
tax
Yes.
freeze, and that's going out
That's-
the hall anyway.
Right. So the question on that is, or do you have a language change that you want in that section before 12:30?
I have concerns about it in general. so
Okay.
That,
You
yes.
Yeah,
go
go,
yes.
okay.
I agree with it.
I don't disagree.
Sure. So what, I mean, there could be some kind of grand bargain struck where we leave the 800-foot road rule in and leave that in and all agree that we've given something up to get to a 5-0 vote. Or,
Or river corridors,
what about river corridors?
state taking over river corridors,
Where is that? No,
that's not in our bill.
okay,
That's-
we're not,
that's in
we're
another
not
bill.
bringing new things to the table before 12:30.
Right.
They have to exist in some form in this bill.
Right.
But I'm just leaving the question open that everyone has a little bit they're having a hard time living with right now. And let's just let that simmer until 12:30 and you all can discuss further, but I would like to get to a unanimous vote on the bill. So the administration and others can hear that before 12:30. And we're going up.
The
to
one point of
Yeah,
contention is
or two.
41. Oh, what's the second one?
The road roll language is point of contention and the AHS language is a point of contention, although,
Oh, right, the permit
Yeah.
in that.
yeah.
Yeah, you can't.
I'm not even saying that I'm fully defending that section because AHS sent that to us yesterday, so they need to come in and defend their.
Yeah.
We haven't had any discussion.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And the
Not on
exemption
new
is new to
language. We did on the old.
Which exemption? The, yes, you're right. I mean, it did exist in a previous bill and we voted it out, so.
Right.
So we've seen the language before, but we ended our consideration of it.
Discussion of the concept, which
Yeah.
again, we had Commissioner Boleo
Right.
Yes.
added to that
So
discussion.
I'm just gonna say, it depends on how strongly everyone feels about the road rule and about this tax exemption. And with that,